Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located in the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstances of each hearing. So first on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. And we have minutes from June 26, 2018 and August 14th, 2018. Does anyone have any corrections? I'll entertain a motion to approve the notes as presented.
I'll make a motion to, do we want to do one by one?
We can if that's preferred. Sure, June 26, 2018.
Yeah, so I move that we adopt the June 26, 2018 minutes as distributed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now the meeting minutes for August 14th, 2018.
I move that we adopt the meeting minutes from August 14th, 2018 as distributed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any informational items from staff today?
Just a couple. On your, in front of each of you was a flyer about some upcoming housing meetings. One other housing-related meeting that I don't think we have told you about yet is on April 16th, same week as the April 18th meeting. There is a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the City Council that you have not been invited to yet, but it's being advertised as a joint meeting where the cottage cluster information is going to be presented. So we'll be sending you some information about that in the near future. But it occurred to me the other day that no one told you about that meeting, so now you've been told. Okay.
All right, now there's an opportunity for audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on any items that are not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there's going to be time for that after the presentation. Is anyone here to comment on an item that's not on the agenda tonight? So we'll move on to the public hearings. We've got 2 hearings tonight, and I think most folks are here for the appeal of the road extension. So that's first on the agenda. So the public hearing on file number AP 2019001 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider an appeal of MLP-2018-001. The Commission initiated this hearing on February 12, 2019, and continued it to today. For an appeal of a Type 2 decision, which is considered an unrestricted de novo hearing, the standard of review is whether the initial decision has findings and/or conditions that are an error as a matter of fact or law. At the hearing on February 12th, the record on this application was left open pursuant to MMC subsection 19.1009.11.d. During this time, the applicant has provided a statement of willingness to extend the 120-day land use clock and make revisions to the proposed partition if necessary. No additional materials or evidence has been received beyond what was provided in the staff report published late last week. Public testimony was closed at the February 12th hearing, but it will be reopened in response to the information provided in the staff report. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. Before we begin, I'd like to give each commissioner the opportunity to state their intent to participate in or abstain from the hearing. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No.
Does any member wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No.
None here. And does any member wish to report on any ex parte contact?
No.
No. Does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by the commissioners? And will any commissioner who has visited the site to this hearing please raise their hand? And did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
No. Has any commissioner that missed any of the previous hearings reviewed the material from those hearings to prepare to participate? I think we were all here for the last go-around. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Okay, so we'll proceed to the staff report.
All right, Acting Chair Burns, good evening, councilors, commissioners. I'm Brett Kelver, Associate Planner with the city, and I'll bring us back from our February 12th initiation of this hearing with a real quick outline of how we figured and what we wrote into the script for this evening in terms of moving through the evening with opportunities for participation by folks. So I'll start with a brief presentation. There'll be an opportunity for the original applicant to testify, and then anyone in support of the applicant. Then an opportunity again for the appellant and anyone in support of the appellant, followed by neutral testimony, and then an opportunity if there are any additional staff comments or questions, and then a final opportunity for the applicant to make some closing remarks and rebuttal. And I would correct one thing that I didn't catch in the script earlier. I think I corrected it at the end, but depending on what you do tonight, since this is an appeal of a director's decision, the decision on the appeal is the final local decision, so there is no appeal to the city council of this decision, but depending on what happens, there may be an opportunity for something else if there's a variance involved. All right, so at the close of our hearing on February 12th, there was some direction from the Planning Commission about a couple of items. One was to present a little bit more information about our analysis of rough proportionality for the requirement for the right-of-way dedication, and also to present you with an outline for the applicant as well as everyone else, some options in the event that there was a finding that right-of-way dedication was not required. What might be some options if the applicant wasn't interested in moving forward with a revised partition? And so I'll cover both of those items. But I think what I'd like to just start with briefly is kind of stepping back a little bit to kind of the origins of the project and walking through some of the discussion that we had with the applicant to arrive at the proposal that was presented. So again, and one of the nice things about having these images, if any of them are helpful in terms of your discussion going back, we'll have these. But this is a map of the subject property showing its existing conditions. And some of the initial conversation with the applicant was about looking for ways to develop the site. And I will say that, every property in the city is unique. And when staff is approached by a property owner with a development idea, we have to look at every site kind of as a unique one. And this site, as we'll get into and as we discussed before, has some unique features in terms of its, as much as anything, its location, where it is with respect to the street system. But it is zoned R7 for kind of low-density residential development, and the applicant, I think, originally and ideally was maybe interested in some kind of cottage cluster type development with condominium arrangement, and she's been working with the cottage cluster project that's in place at this time. But the R7 zone itself right now doesn't allow cottage cluster development, so we had to focus on what the code would allow, so looking at the minimum density for the site and the types of housing and scale that were available. So with that in mind, one of the original ideas was to do a flag lot configuration, and it's called a flag lot because it looks like a flagpole. There's a pole portion and a flag. This one is on its side. So the flag area is where the development happens, and the pole is what provides access. And so this is just a representation of one of the ideas. And what would have been part of this proposal was what's shown here is a duplex. It wouldn't necessarily have had to have been developed with a duplex, but one of the keys here is with this configuration, the applicant was going to have to demonstrate how the flag portion of the lot was large enough to allow for 2 units to be developed in order to meet the minimum density standard of 3 units for the site. So looking at the section of our land division code that addresses flag lots, there is a provision that talks about looking at opportunities for future access. And so I've included all the text, even though there's a lot on the slide, but I tried to underline a couple parts that I thought were important. And one is that the applicant for a flag lot in this situation would have to show that access by means of a dedicated public street was not possible. And in the event that that case could be made, this code section still requires that the applicant would basically design the flag lot so that it allowed for future street development, and part of the final platting process would in fact require a dedication of the flag pole to the public right-of-way, which, as I'll talk about in a little bit, is kind of in a way where we ended up in some respect. But if someone wanted to, in this case, create a flag lot and not have to dedicate to the right-of-way, they would actually need a variance to this section of the code because it does require that there's dedication. Again, part of the process of discussion is trying to identify aspects of a proposal that are obviously approvable and ones that might need some kind of variance. And usually, we, as staff, we are looking to work with the applicant to get to a proposal that does appear approvable. It doesn't mean that the applicant has to do that proposal. They are obviously free to pursue a variance option, but in this case, it would have been with the knowledge that staff would not likely have recommended approval of that. And so in this case, this would have been a type 3 variance that would have come to the Planning Commission, and you would have been tasked with coming up with some findings to address some of these key sections. So, just as a way of illustrating, again, our look kind of at the immediate vicinity showed that the end of White Lake Road was fairly close, and that the line out of everything here did present an opportunity for a potential future street connection, which is why we were kind of into the variance department on this section of code. So to summarize, for this flag lot option, since in order to proceed with a variance with no right-of-way dedication, the minimum density would have needed to be 3. They would have had to show a flag lot configuration that could support a total of 3 units on the site. As part of the final platting, there would have been some right-of-way dedication required, and that section of code is not entirely clear about how much. Our current flag lot standard is a 25-foot pole. It's not entirely clear whether 25-foot width would have needed to be dedicated, or if we look back at the language here, dedication of the future street right-of-way be required. It might have been an opportunity for some interpretation that we could probably get by with 20 feet and maybe would have just been able to take a 20-foot dedication, but there would have been some dedication required or a variance from that standard. And then a couple of other assumptions or things we would have understood would be that since it wasn't technically a flag lot being created because of the dedication of right-of-way, it wouldn't be subject to some of the flag lot standards, which include some more rigorous setback standards. Instead of a 20-foot front and rear setback for the R7 zone, a flag lot has to have a 30-foot front and rear setback and 10-foot side yard setbacks instead of 5 and 10. So we would have understood that since we weren't dealing with a formal flag lot, those wouldn't have applied. We also would have understood or assumed that the house or the structure that would have been built on it would have needed to be oriented to that new right-of-way, and not, as most flag lot houses, they're facing the street, even though they aren't directly on the street. So a couple of things noted here for what would have been involved, including a type 3 variance to get out of the right-of-way dedication requirement. And my note or indication here is that staff would have found it difficult to recommend approval of this because of our look at the street configuration in the surrounding area. Another option is one we're just calling, maybe for lack of a better term, a split lot option. This is, instead of trying to do a flag lot, just basically doing 2 even lots, except with a little compound line jog in the middle. They both would have had approximately 58 feet of frontage on 43rd Avenue. And again, here it's shown as being developed with the duplex. I think part of the point is this lot would have been large enough to support a duplex if that was desired by the property owner. And again, that would have been in order to meet the minimum density requirement of 3 units. So a quick summary here. Again, we're looking for 3 units for minimum density. It appears with this configuration that that jog of what was shown as 20 feet would have met our 10% standard for lot creation, but there would have been a kind of an administrative or type 2 variance needed for going below the 60-foot lot minimum. And again, in this case, given our look at the street configuration, staff would have most likely recommended denial of that variance. And so again, if we had denied it at the administrative level, it would have been appealed possibly by the applicant, and the Planning Commission would have considered and had to come up with findings for that. So again, in terms of talking through the options, here's where we've kind of ended up at. What was finally proposed was a configuration with 2 lots that were more or less equal size. With the right-of-way dedication, the overall lot area decreased, which brought the minimum density requirement down to 2, which is part of why the lots could both be about the same size instead of one of them needing to be at least 14,000 square feet. These are proposed to roughly 10,000 and 11,500 or so. So in summary, that configuration didn't require any variances. It ended up being kind of like the flag lot option, where we had dedication of what would have been like a flagpole to provide for future street connection. And as I'll talk about in just a few minutes, our understanding of where we ended up with the required right-of-way dedication was roughly proportional to the impacts. And then I guess an agreement or a concession that we made was recognizing that it wasn't necessary to improve that new right-of-way for now, so that would allow some of the features that the applicant was concerned about that were existing in that area to remain there for the foreseeable future. Now, in terms of talking about one of those questions that you asked us to address was our analysis of rough proportionality. And I guess just to say that there is an understanding that when one creates a new lot that could be developed, it does create impacts. It's got street frontage, it generates trips that impact the city streets and our other city services. And so that's part of why we do a calculation of what is roughly proportional for the impacts of that lot. There are cases where you might have a really small lot that is getting some kind of a new use on it that has a big impact, like a restaurant or something on a really small lot. That's going to potentially draw a lot of trips. And so in terms of considering what's proportional, it might be, an improvement to a traffic signal down the street because of those impacts. Likewise, you might have a really large lot that's getting developed in such a way that maybe the impacts aren't quite so large, and so it may not be proportional to require improvements along its entire large frontage. So that's part of what we're trying to get at here with this rough proportionality. So what was addressed in the staff report, I'll just try to cover a couple of our considerations or calculations about this. And again, one of the key words in rough proportionality as a phrase is that it is rough. There are no hard numbers necessarily. We've tried to present some as ways of examples, but there's no formula that's set up in the code. And I think part of the idea is that you're presenting what is a reasonable assessment of exactions or requirements based on impact. And so what we did starting out was to, working with this idea of getting 2 lots requiring a right-of-way dedication was, in an ideal scenario, in terms of the city getting all the improvements that it might want, would be right-of-way dedication as well as some improvement of a street in front of what we'll call the parent lot, or lot 1, if I back up. So this lot has an existing house, and the act of drawing a line behind it to create a new lot doesn't mean that this lot is creating any new impacts. So there's some limit on what the city could reasonably require. But since this is the new lot with new impacts, you have to get to it somehow, conceptually. And so the idea is, while the city might not be able to require a full street improvement along this frontage because that's the no new impact lot, you have to get there somehow. And so you would have some minimal improvement. In this case, I think it would be maybe a 16-foot wide asphalt drive to get there. And then once we get to the frontage of the new lot, now we're looking at the kinds of regular street improvements that you would get: curb, sidewalk, landscape strip, kind of, again, recognizing that this new lot is having new trips, new impacts on the system. And so when we did just kind of a rough look at what that that new lot share of the improvements, working with the number that the applicant gave us, that $187,000 some dollar figure, and calculating the length of frontage of both those lots, the rough calculation was, well, that'd be about $88,000. And that seems to fall outside the range that we've identified in general of what is a roughly proportional range of costs for new single-family development. So, next step, take a look at what if we don't get all those improvements along this frontage? What if we get instead a minimal improvements along the no new impact lot 1, and then maybe just allow a driveway access into parcel 2, but collect a fee in lieu of construction. So instead of having the applicant build physical improvements, we assess a fee that we are able to hold on to and either use later on that frontage or at some other area in the neighborhood for related improvements. And our calculation, the number that the city has right now for a per lineal foot cost of the fee in lieu of is $446. So for the length of the Lot 2 frontage, that would have been about $47,000. That does fall a little bit more within that range that we identified of $30,000 to $57,000. However, so we consider it to be proportional, but it wasn't a design that we would really like to have in the city. So the idea would have been we would have had basically a 16-foot wide drive ending in a driveway, and I think the consideration of staff and the engineering department was that's not really the kind of improvement that we'd like to see. So it may be proportional, but we'd rather not do that. And again, that's getting a little bit at providing some disturbance to some of the features that the applicant would like to retain on the site. So another step then is, what if we just do the right-of-way, consider the value of the property for the right-of-way dedication, and calculate the value of that. When we did that, we got a number that fell more within the range and did result in something that the city felt was usable. So getting right-of-way dedication for the possibility of a street connection in the future, as well as some right-of-way dedication in front of the Lot 1, which would help the sidewalk project that's happening in the near future on 43rd. And so that was our basic determination of why we felt it was roughly proportional to get the right-of-way dedication for the proposed partition.
Brett, could you add why Lot 1 wasn't part of the calculation?
Well, I guess, again, to summarize, Parcel 1 is not creating any new impacts. The act of just creating Parcel 2 doesn't mean that anything newly intensive is happening on Lot 1.
And the frontage along the right-of-way for Lot 1 is not part of that calculation because that is necessary to get to Parcel 2.
Right. All right. So, with that said, the other issue that we were asked to look at was if you conclude, we feel that, again, our assessment is that it was roughly proportional, but if in your deliberations and the discussion tonight, if you find that it's not, we want to outline some of the other options that might be possible if the applicant wanted to continue with a partition that didn't include right-of-way dedication. And so I would just recap that the two options would be some kind of a flag lot configuration that didn't include right-of-way dedication, but it would have to have a variance from that requirement. And you would have to, you discuss that and we'd help develop findings for that. Another option would be what we're calling the split lot partition with that compound line, would need a variance for lot width, and even though that would ordinarily be a planning director kind of administrative decision, since the partition is already being considered by you, our suggestion or recommendation would be that if the applicant wanted to proceed that way, we just come back to the planning commission and have the planning commission approve that variance. And then it may be possible that the applicant could come up with some other configurations that didn't involve right-of-way dedication. They may or may not involve variances, but we haven't really explored any of those in detail, but I wanted to list that as a possibility. For those options, I guess I would just highlight that the applicant would need to do what they've indicated they're willing to do, which is waive the requirement that the city have a final decision within 120 days. So they'd be able to keep their application alive and make some revisions to it. And then the the appeal, which was on the original proposal, would be temporarily suspended while the partition is revised, brought back to you. And if it were to be then approved with whatever variances are needed, I suppose technically that would mean that the appeal was denied, the partition was approved, but in a different configuration and with the variance that it needed that didn't include right away. So with all that said, I guess our simple conclusions are that we do feel like that the rough proportionality analysis that we did is sufficient. And we did suggest in the staff report, if you find it helpful, I think it adds to a little bit of that finding. We suggested an additional sentence that might provide a little more clarity as part of the rough proportionality finding. And then just in general, I guess, again, we'd say that we felt like it was important, even if a connection doesn't happen for a long time that it was important for the city to at least preserve the possibility that it might be able to do that and not have to go back and buy property when it had the opportunity to fairly exact it for the partition. So with that said, I'll just again recap what we listed in the staff report as the options. They include finding that the original findings and conditions are sufficient with the tweak that we suggested or not, and basically denying the appeal, approving the partition. Or you could just go ahead and approve the appeal and deny the partition altogether, kind of ending its life. The third one, which is kind of what we presented some other options are about, is if you kind of temporarily suspend the appeal or preliminarily deny it, but allow the applicant an opportunity to revise the partition, add whatever variances are needed, and come back to the Planning Commission at a future date to consider that. That would be another one. And then kind of the fourth option, which would again require the applicant to extend the 120-day clock, would be if you decide, based on whatever you hear tonight, that you need still more time to discuss it. The end of the 120-day clock right now is 2 days from now on Thursday. So the applicant would need to waive the 120-day clock to allow you to continue it and come back again. So with that said, I'll ask you if you have any questions or if there's a diagram or something you'd like me to leave up here for now.
Questions?
Brett, would you go back to the option slide?
This one? Or
No, the one that,
one in particular?
that one, the calculations, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in calculation 2, when there's a fee put into one of these situations, does that fee go into some sort of dedicated escrow account or to the general fund? What happens with that fee?
Can I call Alex up to address that?
Alex with engineering. I believe it's just its own account. The way the fee in lieu of works is that you can apply that money anywhere within a neighborhood district, and after 10 years, it expires if you don't use it, and then it gets refunded.
Okay. And so one more question. In calculation 3, what happens with that dedication? Does that also go into is that also a fee?
Well, there's no direct money associated with the dedication. That's just the rough value that we assign to the property. So that is if we were having to buy that property. I'm not sure that's the price that we would end up with because that would be a whole negotiation.
Understood.
But kind of our calculation based on the assessed value of the land.
Okay, so
that's
it's
just
a preliminary
a
assessment.
value, right? It's just a value. There's no money changing hands directly there.
Thank you.
I did have a question on calculation 2 does not include any right-of-way dedication.
Not as a value.
The calculation 1 and 2 both include the right-of-way.
They
The White
include it,
Lake right-of-way.
but the number doesn't include the value of the property. So one could argue it would be a little
Calculations
higher.
1 and 2 would also include the same amount of right-of-way dedication, and that value of the right-of-way dedication is really omitted from calculations 1 and 2.
More or less, yes. Well, one distinction would be, for calculations 1 and 2, we're not getting we wouldn't be getting the 5-foot dedication in front of parcel 1. We would just be getting the 20-foot dedication in front of, on the north side of both of these, because because there's no direct impact from parcel one, our starting point would be just getting this right-of-way dedication. And so, yeah, I did not include the value of the property in that.
It's not really apples to apples, it seems like, that if you were to include that value in calculation two, it's hard to see that it would still remain within the rough proportional
You could
range.
argue that it would not. Which,
Some fraction of the 40,000 in Calc 3 is also included in Calc 2.
right, yeah. Which would get us, I guess, more just into where we ended up, which was the
That it's
calculation
not,
three.
may not be proportional.
Right.
This notion of the parent lot or the no new impact lot, is that something that is in code or governed by case law? I'm trying to understand. It seems to me that the act of dividing is creating the impact, not lot one or lot two. And I'm just wondering if there's a code or case law that directed you to that terminology and that conclusion, or where that came from.
I don't know specifically code, but I think the understanding is that if you have an existing developed lot that's large enough to divide, you have a house on that lot, say, and we see a new impact with the creation of new lots that can be developed, and that's what we are considering when we're trying to think about accounting for the impacts and trying to figure out what's roughly proportional. The idea is that that parent lot isn't presenting any new impacts just because it gets a little bit smaller. You are catching impacts from the things it's being separated from that could be developed.
So it's the presence of the structure determines that one lot is a parent and the other is the parent in the no new impact lot, and the other lot is, I suppose I follow.
Right. I think if this property was undeveloped, it's same size but no house on it, and someone was doing a partition to create two new lots, I think our assessment would be a little bit different, because we would see it as it's a vacant property that's not currently having any impacts, and now it is set up for at least two units, and so that would change our assessment a little bit. Otherwise, I guess one could argue it feels a little bit like double dipping if you're saying, well, wait a minute, I've already had a house. I'm not building a new house. There's no new impact. Why am I getting assessed for?
I'm trying to understand whether it's the net impact of one house or the presence of that impact on the back lot. You're framing it as it's the back lot is driving the improvements rather than the net addition to the transportation grid of a lot, and it doesn't matter whether it's the front or back lot. I don't know that I have a specific question other than understand the position and where that language comes from.
Okay.
I think you've explained it. Okay, I think we're good with questions then.
Right. Is there a slide that would be helpful to have up here?
It's up to the commissioners.
Okay.
Dependent on the picture.
Okay, so, and before we begin commission deliberations, we'll reopen the hearing for public testimony. First, we'll have the applicant to provide a response or rebuttal to the staff presentation. Could you please state your name and address for the record?
My name's Michelle DeRosa. I live at 10244 Southeast 43rd Avenue in Milwaukee. And hopefully my comments will help you understand a little bit about at least the case law that I have studied about how the courts see impact and how they deal with it, although it doesn't get to this lot one or two idea. In our first application meeting, which I think I shared with you last time, the former head of the engineering department said to us that the city had plans for our property, and this was a pre-app meeting for this partition that we were considering. And last month in the public hearing here, that sentiment was kind of echoed in that it was expressed by the planners that this was an opportunity to work towards the city's goal of connectivity and better road access. And I heard some of the commissioners also echo that sentiment, that the city didn't want to miss an opportunity to fulfill its important goals of connectivity and better pedestrian and bicycle access, in particular to roads and services, on what I think you're talking about is a more sensible and a tighter grid of public roads. Milwaukee's not known for that right now, I think, as a general proposition. The City of Tigard and the Coastal Commission of California, of course, are the parties to the Supreme Court cases that I would say, our situation invokes. And they had lofty policies and legislated regulations, too, that came into question when they applied those regulations to similar circumstances in which a land use application or a request for permits was conditioned upon actual taking of real property rights. One in the Nolan case of just an easement of several feet wide across their property, and the other of a dedication more like ours, but of 10% of the Dolan's property in the city of Tigard. So I'd like to say a few, in my perspective, why, notwithstanding the planner's hard work and I think thorough understanding of the code here, and trying to apply that in a fair way. And I also want to acknowledge the irony of my position here, which is that I do want you to approve my partition, but I really don't want to have to give 20% of my land away. It's a weird position to be in. So I want to acknowledge that irony, but also explain why I think that this is still an unlawful taking, notwithstanding that our application includes this dedication. And I'm sure you're aware that both in Dolan and Nolan, those parties as well had agreed to those dedications of the easement on the one hand and the 10% of the land in the Dolans. And that didn't have any effect on their claim against the cities or the Coastal Commission in that case. So both Dolan and Nolan involve the application of legislated land use regulations, just like here. But the court found that in that case, regulated takings were, in the case of taking land, as opposed to just a monetary exaction or a diminution of value or use of the land, that the courts decided, the Supreme Court twice, Nolan first and then Dolan, that when a jurisdiction takes property as a condition, that leads to a heightened scrutiny and it shifts the burden of proof from the landowner about the fairness of that and the constitutionality of it to the government. And the government has to do a good job of passing the tests that the Supreme Court set up. So I wanted to just kind of run through those tests very briefly, because one of them is codified and one of them is not, but they're both applicable. Nolan stands for the proposition that the government may exercise its police power for legitimate purposes by conditioning the granting of an entitlement, here, a partition in our case, if there is, quote, a nexus between the condition and the original purpose of the building restriction, unquote. But the court found that the, quote, the evident constitutional propriety disappears if the condition substituted for the prohibition utterly fails to further the end advanced as the justification for the prohibition. Thank you, Supreme Court. This is not all that clear. But as applied, I think, to this case, I'm hoping to explain it. What I see is, in other words, the city of Milwaukee's condition on our petition, the dedication of a 20-foot right-of-way, is only constitutional if it solves the same problem, or what the court often refers to as an evil. It solves the same evil that denying our partition altogether would also solve. The court would ask, is the kind of harm that would be avoided by denying the DeRosas their partition be the same kind of harm? This is qualitative, by the way, a qualitative test. Would it be the same kind of harm that the dedication would resolve? And the answer here, I believe, is no. One way to think about this is whether the condition on development has a nexus to the development's expected impact on the city. The question is, does the punishment fit the crime, so to speak? Again, the court talks about these kinds of impacts on government as an evil that development has. The planners have said that the kind of harm the establishment of a new parcel can be expected to have, as cited by their report, is an impact on the city's transportation and utility systems. And we agree that developing our property would have such an impact, although truthfully, that impact won't come to fruition until we actually build something. But the question is there a nexus, an essential nexus, that would make this constitutional? It matters to the courts how the government articulates the problem that the imposed condition is supposed to solve. In our case, the city has said that in addition to that impact to the systems of utilities and roads, what has come up again and again, and you've heard repeatedly, is the need for connectivity and for just better road connection. And we heard last time some specific examples about what that meant. It meant shorter trips for the folks behind us to Safeway in our position in our property, for instance, or facilitating the future development of property, Frank's behind us, which is not our new parcel, and for providing an easier flow of traffic to major arteries, which is, I presume, 43rd and King, because those are the big ones around us. Applying the nexus test, however, shows that the stated purpose of the condition imposed on our partition, meaning the problem that the dedication is expected to solve, is poor connectivity, i.e. poor connectivity, is not the problem our development would create. Right now, there's poor connectivity. If we didn't develop, there would still be poor connectivity for our neighbors who, by the way, don't want the connectivity, which I'm sure you'll hear more about. The courts say the best way to test whether this is an essential nexus is to imagine the result of full denial of the requested entitlement and compare that to the result of enacting the condition on the application or the development. So in my opinion, if we were not to develop our land, there would be no new impact. That's pretty easy to understand, right? Whether it's first lot or second lot, if we don't develop, there's no new impact. But the stated problem that the condition of dedication of, well, with a 5-foot strip would be 20% of our land, in fact, but 18% with a 20-foot right-of-way. I think that the dedication of our land is meant to resolve connectivity. It wouldn't be any better if we did not develop. That doesn't solve the problem that that dedication helps to, or is stated to resolve. So the courts see that as a demonstration that there is no essential nexus between the dedication of the right-of-way and the harm our development can be expected to have on the government, on the city of Milwaukee. In fact, the Supreme Court found that the failure to demonstrate the nexus, this essential nexus, indicates that the condition on the development is, in fact, premised on other motives, a situation the court found unacceptably suspect. And the justices called it subterfuge, meaning it's just a tricky way to get private citizens' land for free, when such a taking would normally require just compensation. The second test that the Supreme Court has created and the Oregon courts have all followed in this line of cases is with the rough proportionality test, which has been codified. And this was developed in the case of the city of Dolan versus the city of Tigard. And this rough proportionality test has been, providing an analysis purely based on monetary value, I would say in this case, is not really what the courts had in mind. What we've heard from the planners is that if you just take the average of what the single-family development pays in order to, towards public improvements, and you take a per square foot value of our property, just the land as I understand it, which the county supplied that amount, and I haven't vetted that. We haven't had an appraisal or anything like that, so I don't think it's an outrageous valuation, though, to tell you the truth. But that alone is not what the courts are talking about when they're talking about rough proportionality. The question that the court requires the government to answer is not whether the value of the land based on square footage is similar to what other like developments pay for public improvements, but rather the test in those cases is, quote, whether the degree of the exactions bear the required relationship to the projected impact of the petitioner's proposed development. Notice that it doesn't say anything about providing an additional benefit to the city that they get to have just because I'm asking to do something with my property that is not, in this case, a conditioned use. It's a use that we have the right to do. We're not asking for a zoning change. We're not asking for a subdivision. We're just asking for something that's an unconditional use for an R7 lot of this size. The burden on the developer must be commensurate with the harm the development would create on the city's transportation and utility systems. And the courts, I can't find any case in which they reduce that harm, that balancing of the harm between what the condition has on the developer and the harm that the development will have on the city. That's not, in these cases, a monetary calculation alone. which is what we have here. Rather, the burden of the proof is on the government to show that the harm of the development's impact to the government is proportional to the harm the condition will have on us, the developer. And the courts apply heightened scrutiny to the government's motives, methods, and purposes in cases like ours. In other words, the city has to do a really good job evaluating the harm of the condition on us and the harm of the development on the city that our development will have, and balancing them with this condition of approval. And the planner's rough proportionality analysis, they've failed entirely, I think, to take into consideration the unique character and value of the land they want. And that's the whole key to real estate. Real estate is unique. And Brett got to that. Every parcel's unique. But that's why the heightened scrutiny attaches to a taking of property as opposed to just a taking of money like with SDCs. There's a much lower bar to prove that system development charges are in fact related, and proportionally so, to the impact that your development is going to have. When you take land, there's heightened scrutiny involved in that. They've failed to consider the character of that land and its association with the rest of the property and what that's worth. So I think that they've failed to consider that there's 2 apple trees, 2 plum trees, a quince tree, 45 feet of table grapes that is a bearing arbor. There's screening from our neighbors that provide privacy and safety. There's wildlife habitat and the enclosure of the property the fencing provides. We have a gazebo, a built-in fire pit that's been there forever. Not the gazebo forever, but the built-in fire pit, and the balance of nature and natural beauty that strip of property offers us against what is, all of our neighbors know, Frank particularly, who lives right behind us, a hulking, imposing apartment building on our south boundary. It runs the entire length of that boundary. It's 2.5 stories high from where our land is, and it glares lights on it every minute of every day that when it's dark. It's a big deal. That's what you see when you're out there. And that strip of land on the north provides a balance to that that's valuable. And the future matters. When we develop property and we go to sell it, we'll have to disclose to anyone who wants to buy those houses that the northern boundary might look like a park and it might look like a gentleman farmer's dream, but we'll have to say to them, you won't own it, you won't control it, and at any time the city can come and destroy the trees, tear down the fence and the screening landscaping, build a thoroughfare to replace the park-like character of that part of our land. Our prospective buyers will imagine all of the parade of horrors that our neighbors are imagining about that kind of development, and they'll worry about what our neighbors are worrying about now. Except the case for our buyers is even more immediate in that it's not just the glimmer of the threat of condemnation. It's really, you don't own it. It's not yours. And while the planners, I think, will be quick to point out, and they did mention that the trees and the gazebo would be allowed to stay, they have said that those valuable features of the land and their elimination or their removal will not be imminent, but they certainly hope that it will be inevitable. The harm to us, in other words, I believe, goes well beyond the 5,000 square feet of raw land that the city estimates. Without the consideration, the value of which they estimate without the consideration of the land's placement, its character, or the use and value it lends to the remainder of the property, future homes, and even the value of our own home, I think, will be affected. We believe the harm to us in taking this property from our ownership and control, even before the land is developed into a thoroughfare of some kind, is greater than the harm that our development will have on the city, on its infrastructure, especially when you consider that through SDC charges, the dedication of land on 43rd, and eventual improvements that we'll be expected to make on 43rd when we do what we hope to do, which is to build a couple of ADUs on that property, we'll have to put $25,000 or $30,000 worth of sidewalks in on 43rd, in addition to the conditions that will cost us money now. With just this partition, we need to do a couple $1,000s worth of improvements to our driveway approach. If you were to approve our partition tonight, we have to put in a new dry well so that we would mitigate the stormwater that's coming from the existing house. It's hard to know where that water goes now. And so the city would require us to put in a dry well and about 95 feet of storm piping, which will require us to tear up most of the landscaping around the foundation and parts of our driveway, which will have to be repaired. That's going to run probably about $10,000. So we are providing in real time those improvements as well as that 5-foot dedication on 43rd. And as soon as we start to build something, we'll have to do more. And of course, we're kind of in this fiction because the partition itself doesn't mean anyone lives on it. We're just putting an invisible legal line on a piece of property. It's when we build and when people are there and occupying those new homes that there will in fact be an impact. So I think we're all engaging in that fiction, but if we're going to do so, then I think that we should consider what we'll have to pay in addition to the value of the dedication when those improvements are required to pull permits. So I think that you must be wondering why our original application includes this 20-foot dedication when we do in fact believe it to be unlawful. And the fact of the matter is that we capitulated to the planner's preferred configuration, and it solved a lot of problems. I mean, as we worked through the code with Brett and Alex, there's actually no way to develop our property without a significant dedication of land or a whole bunch of type 3 variances because of the MMC and its implications in this particular case. It just plays out in a way that's really difficult. And I think Brett and Alex particularly have thought about this really hard for us and tried to find a way that worked. This way works, but I still don't think it's lawful. It's not what we want to do. And it's certainly not what our neighbors want to do. I think that, and I hate to bring this up, but as I understand it, we will have to get variances for the MMC 19.700, the public improvements that have to do with the distance between our driveway and the nearest corner, which is 300 feet. The minimum distance between cross streets is 600 feet. We exceed that by a little bit. And the 1,800-foot distance around the block, we'll still need variances for those for which there are no type 2 variances. Those are discretionary. And when we put this application together, we knew that. We knew that doing anything else would require type 3 variances. They're expensive. They're uncertain. Right? And we were new to Milwaukee and to all of you. We know you better now. But at the time, the uncertainty led us to say, well, we'll try this first, knowing that we would still reserve the right to bring a claim if we felt that that was prudent and something that we could win. And we also knew, as was iterated tonight, that whatever variances we had to get in any other configuration is something that the planners would tell you not to give us. So we felt with that level of uncertainty and level of adversity that this was pretty much the only way to go, at least as a first volley. So that's what I have to say for right now, which I know is a lot, and thank you.
Oh, did we have any questions for the applicant? Sorry.
Should I not run away?
Any questions? I did have one, which you talked about the trees and the gazebos that might have to be lost when the right-of-way goes through, but do you have a development configuration in mind? Is that going to happen regardless as part of this development?
Well, actually, as I understood it, with either of the plans, the split lot down the middle, those would stay. And the ultimate goal of ours is to to get this partition so we have the right to build another house and another ADU. We hope to put a second ADU on the original lot so that we would have 4. And then I would condominiumize the whole parcel, wipe out the partition lines, which is, again, really ironic, given the struggle we've had to partition it. We would just wipe it out, and you'd have a condominium plat, and all of those folks would share that strip of land. So that was our original concept, although, as Brett pointed out, maybe with more little houses, but that's probably not possible. In either of those configurations, we feel like maybe one of them, I think, would eliminate a pear tree. It's a big pear tree, but otherwise we can develop around it, and we would just bring the house way back on the lot, whether it's a flag or not, which, as I understand, is permissible.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for your testimony, and now we have an opportunity for folks who are testifying in support of the applicant. So this would be folks who actually, in spite of what the testimony we heard where there's mixed feelings from the applicant, we're looking for folks who want us to approve the application and allow White Lake Road to go through to come testify. Is there anybody who's in support of the applicant's, not necessarily testimony, but request of the commission to approve the application? Okay, so nobody's here to support the applicant's ask of the commission tonight. Next we have an opportunity to hear from the appellant. So that would be Mr. Barella. You're up next, and after Mr. Barella testifies, we'll have an opportunity for anyone who's here to support him to also testify. So please state your name and address for the record. And Mr. Barella, I don't think is on the clock as the appellant, but we are going to initiate a timer for future testimony for members of the public who are here. But you have unmitigated time.
Well, it won't be long. I mean, I guess the old adage, Dan Barella, 10194 Southeast 43rd Avenue. I guess the old saying goes, you can't fight City Hall. And thanks for making me to be the bad guy here to file for the appeal. So it's really disheartening. But the main concern is that road. I mean, we don't got a clear idea what it is, an alley, a road, just something that's going to go through. And so basically my have the same concern is how will I sell the house if that's going to be looming over, if there's going to be like a road running right next to my house. And the security of the privacy. I mean, that will totally take away all my privacy. Just have people just can walk up into my lawn, look in, and two, the ever-rising homeless situation, which most of them are on bikes. And unfortunately, I work for TriMed, and I'm the main culprit of bringing all the homeless to where they want to be for free because we can't fight for fares. So, I mean, I just think it's just totally be unsafe. I mean, we're not in the 60s and 70s anymore where, people with coats and long dresses and little girls in pigtails are going to be walking by. I mean, it's a pretty bad homeless situation that the cities and counties need to address, which is getting quite rampant. So other than that, I mean, I feel bad that I had to appeal to Del Rosa's there, and like I totally oppose this. And the future is that road, are you going to be like taking the land and putting smaller houses, duplex? I mean, what's the whole real deal with that?
Yeah, we're volunteers and we're not the city, so we're just here to hear you and make a decision on the specifics of the appeal. But any questions about the future, we just don't have the answers to that, and it's not our role. But Brett and the other planners are the ones who can answer that for you.
Okay, well, I mean, this is my first house, and it seems like I just bought a lemon. So that's about all I have to say.
Are there any questions for Mr. Barella? I will just note there are no bad guys in the room. You're not a bad guy. The applicant's not a bad guy. The planners certainly aren't. And again, we're volunteers here to do our best. So thank you for being part of the process, and you've been heard.
Okay, thank you.
So after that, we have opportunities for folks who are in support of the appellant, so who are opposed to the land process here. So I've got cards. If anybody wishes to testify and hasn't filled out a card yet, please do so. In no particular order, I'm going to start with Chris Leone. Please come up and state your name and address for the record. And we will ask the members of the public who are testifying to keep it to 3 minutes.
No problem. Thank you. Chris Leone, 4471 Southeast White Lake. Just here to be on record again against extension of White Lake Road. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. No questions on that, I assume. And next we have Frank Fassold. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Frank Fossold, 4446 Southeast White Lake Road. I'm the property directly behind the DeRosas. I'm in favor of their development, but I'm very strongly against any future extension of White Lake Road. We're here regarding two possible futures for White Lake Road. The first raises revenue for Milwaukee. The second cost the city of Milwaukee, the taxpayers' money. Leaving White Lake Road the way it is and allowing development of 1 or 2 homes on the DeRosa property makes money for Milwaukee, with tax values being about $3,500 a year. 2 homes could be $7,000 or more in taxes for the city. 1 or 2 additional houses would still leave lots of lawn and trees to absorb stormwater runoff. Leaving White Lake Road the way it is maintains the peace, quiet, and safety within this little corner of the Llewellyn neighborhood. Peace, quiet, and safety. I miss the Clackamas Review's community safety report. They used to tell where break-ins and theft occurred. It was a Safeway Center business and parking. The business is there on 43rd, all the streets all around, especially on Mason Street, which is a ways away, but still. But there wasn't any on our street. Part of this may just be good luck. It may also be having a dead-end street. 140 feet is not much of a dead-end street, just 2 houses deep. But that involves 5 homes. It may also be knowing our neighbors and not having through traffic from 43rd. I share a fence line with Dan. He's on a flag lot. Tony and Michelle DeRosa behind me. Chris and Sarah beside me. Dana beside me. And Bill and Patty, who couldn't make it tonight, in front of me. My house is 1 block from 45th. It's 1 block from 45th over to Rhodesia and then up to 43rd. It's 1 block from 46th to King Road. On our street, we have 5 children within 3 families, and that's on White Lake Road. A 1 block zigzag only helps to slow traffic down. Extending White Lake Road has no benefit to us, the residents, the taxpayers, the people who live here. Extending White Lake Road will cost money for the street, close to 370 feet, roughly, between my property and the DeRosas. On that, you can add curbs and sidewalk, the plumbing, electric, the drainage, the maintenance for sweeping. I think I said stormwater runoff added to the system. Buying and compensating property owners, 7 of us, for the loss of property. The loss of privacy and safety cannot be compensated for. Would you then, if the street did go through, would you then put in speed bumps to help slow drivers down? As it is, we have a little zigzag there, and again, it's only 1 block, but that slows people down. They had to put speed bumps in on Locust. And then there's speed bumps on Home or Wood, I don't remember which. I'm sure there's other streets within Milwaukee that also have speed bumps to slow drivers down. Regardless, it's more money. Also, a path or bike path in the name of connectivity, some 370 feet long, could also be dangerous to users as well as the residents. Again, it's only one block to go around. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Brett, do you have any idea how much it is? I think I missed how much it is per foot to put a street in. Just something to think about for it's got to be hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a street that long.
Well,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, I'm sorry, but it's...
our fee in lieu of construction is a half-street figure, I think. So that...
446 lineal foot?
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be quite fair to double it for a full street improvement, because there's probably some economy of scale, I would think. But, I mean, there's some sense of how much it would cost for...
Does that include sidewalks and the storm drains and...
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd times that 446 by roughly 370 feet to come up with a price which is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Excuse, before you go, sir.
we had a question.
Quick question. Do you know anybody that uses a wheelchair or a walker or a mobility device to get around?
Not in our neighborhood, no.
So you've never walked with someone who uses a wheelchair from your house to the nearest shopping center?
No.
Okay.
Again, it's only one block out to go around.
It's an additional almost half a mile by my measurements, but thank you for your time. Did you have any other?
Oh, I was just going to say a half a mile would be...
You go to the north and you go all the way around and then back around?
But still, that's only it's two houses from White Lake over. You'd be eliminating that stretch from 45th up to 43rd, because that distance would be the same whether it's over here at Rhodesia or whether it's White Lake. So it's only two houses, roughly 100, again, about 140 foot, maybe more, over, and then another 140 foot back. That wouldn't be a half mile.
It was close to 2,000 feet, so not quite half a mile.
Yes, but I believe you're including the distance from 45th up to 43rd to get that.
Think maybe that was the sum total.
It would have to be.
But it was, I mean,
So
a considerable distance for someone who is mobility impaired, and that's really what my concern was.
Right. So, but again, that distance between 45th and 43rd would be the same, whether it's over here or over here, whether it's White Lake or Rhodesia. All we should be talking about is that one short block, and it's only two houses.
The format of this really isn't set up to be a dialogue.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just trying to do the chair as best I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosa. Yeah, so I'm just trying to gauge whether you've actually had the experience of traveling with somebody who is mobility impaired over that distance.
No, but a lot of us do walk to the store on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Okay. We have one more. I think it says Dana Stearns. Am I reading the handwriting right? Okay. And please state your name and address for the record so I know how to pronounce it next time.
My name is Dana Stearns, and I'm at 4459 Southeast White Lake Road. I'm across from Frank and behind Dan and kitty corner from the DeRosas. I've been there for 23 years. I purchased that lot because it was a dead end, and I had a small child. I'm a single mom, and it was a safe place to raise a child. Matter of fact, the neighborhood kids would come into my driveway and play because I have a big circular driveway. And the kids in the neighborhood still play in my driveway. They ride their bikes. It's safe. They're off the street. Putting a road through would take all that away. It'd take a chunk of the front of my property away, along with my garden that I plant every year. That keeps me through the summer with fresh vegetables and all that good stuff. And a lot of privacy, and it would take away my safety. So having a walkway through there invites people into the neighborhood that don't necessarily need to be there. In 23 years, I've had one officer asked to check my property because somebody from Safeway stole something and they believed it ran through the neighborhood, but that was only last year. And so I think inviting more in, we'd probably see a lot more cops in our neighborhood, and we don't want that because it's quiet right now. So, thank you. And I do have a disabled sister, and we walk to Safeway all the time.
Any questions for Ms. Stearns? Thank you. So that was all the yellow comment cards I had. So I think at this point we move on to the staff response. Does staff wish to address any questions or comments that came up in the public testimony?
Yeah, thank you. I'll say a couple things. One is that I guess the characterization, to some degree, and I appreciate Michelle's appreciation for the work that we've tried to do, and I realize that it's a little bit of a difficult position. It's always an interesting dance that we do as staff working with folks. I guess I do take some issue with the characterization of the city having plans for the property. That makes it sound like we've been waiting to pounce on this site rather than looking at it in the context of a proposed development and considering the surrounding area. There is a street that dead ends very close. I mean, it's not. It doesn't mean that it has to go through, but in terms of just assessing what's there, I think it's fair for there to be some understanding that we're looking at this particular site for its characteristics. If this site was located 100 feet to the south, we wouldn't be talking about a possible street connection. There are plenty of 2 or 3 lot partitions that we look at that we never get into street connections with because the surrounding area is already committed to development and doesn't have the same possibility for it. So, I mean, several times there's been that reference to us having some kind of ulterior motive rather than looking at the conditions around the site and then looking at the code. And there was an acknowledgement that we are working with the code and the rules. We're not just making this up, but I think it's more accurate to look at the process and the need for variances that would be involved with other requests before looking at this issue of a taking or the city kind of getting something that it wants. As I outlined in the options, for other configurations of lots for this particular site, which has the potential, we believe, for a future street connection, there would be variances needed. The applicant could go through that process, and as we said, we believe you, the Planning Commission, and/or the City Council on appeal would be the ones who would decide the question of, is it practicable and reasonable and appropriate to grant a variance for not providing right-of-way here. It's a possible outcome. You could decide it, or the city council could decide it on appeal, but that would be the frame of the question instead of some kind of larger calculation. We've talked about monetary values and whatnot, but it really comes down to the process would require a variance in either of those other scenarios and somebody, the planning commission or the city council, to decide it was reasonable and appropriate to not have a street connection through there. So just trying to kind of set that frame that it's not, that we have kind of a code requirement about connectivity, and that's what's driving it. It's about you're proposing to do X, you have to move through the code. You can't do X unless you get a variance. Someone has to approve it. There's a process for that. So, just to one correction, I think, to one thing the applicant said, and this is part of what we did between the last hearing and this hearing, was we tried to look back at some of these other possible options and identify what variances we thought would be required. And our conclusion was that some of our earlier thinking about the variances that we talked about for street spacing wouldn't be applying if you're not proposing a street. So the idea is when you're proposing a street connection that you need to address this issue of, is it too close or too far from a connection? So I don't believe that those variances would be required, and it really would boil down more to the ones that we listed tonight.
We didn't fully complete talking about that internally, so I just want to put an asterisk on that one, that
Okay.
there is some internal discussion that still needs to occur.
There you go. So it's likely that they would not be required, but not 100%.
Yeah.
Just a note about the, the consideration of land value and assessing the land value. I mean, that's not something that I have a lot of expertise in, or any, actually. So I understand that in situations where one is condemning property using eminent domain and having to purchase it, that there is a negotiation and questions about appraisals of property come into it. We think that our basic assessment using the assessed value of the county is fair. I understand the applicant's point about the larger kind of market value of the property. And I think it's fair to say that there are some parts of the property that you could take that would be extremely valuable in that they would reduce any further development value. Taking like a donut hole out of the middle of it so there's no building footprint, that would be extremely valuable property. Requiring dedication of right-of-way along the edges of property for these potential connections, I think one could argue that there's not that much of a reduction of the overall value. It doesn't make that rest of that property undevelopable, or we wouldn't be talking about it. I'm sure there's some more discussion that could be had about how to arrive at a fair sense of number, but we certainly thought that our method of doing that was reasonable. And I guess I want to come back just briefly to the delicate balance that we've been trying to talk through from the beginning on this, and that is, on the one hand, walking through the requirements of the code, which to us pointed to a more easily approvable partition without variances if there was right-of-way dedication. And we tried to explain, both in the memo to Mr. Barella when he raised questions and comments before, as well as in the hearing, that the city didn't, in fact, have an active plan to physically construct the street. So on the one hand, we're trying to hold that to kind of assuage people's concerns that we're not here tonight talking about a physical road going through. And yet, it is true that the reason we think it's important not to lose the connection is because in the future, it would be meaningful to have a connection. So it's right for people to tune into the issue and share what they've shared. But just again, to be clear, this is not an approval for a road going through tonight. It's to preserve the possibility of it. And we noted before that several other things would have to happen. And for the far end of the scare factor spectrum, even without the partition, because of White Lake being dead-ending so close in 43rd, even without someone proposing a partition, if the city decided that it had a lot of money and that this connection was really important, it could just go through the process of condemning property using the eminent domain process and putting a street through there, negotiating with the property owners to buy what it needed. So, I mean, it's true that the partition does give us the opportunity to get some of that through the right-of-way dedication process. But, I mean, Mr. Barella buying his lot and seeing where it is with respect to White Lake should understand that it's not very likely, but it's possible at any time without anyone doing any development that the city could approach Mr. Fassold, buy his entire property, tear down the house because right now it's in the way. And if he doesn't develop and change the house, there's no easy way to get it through. So all that to say, that's just, we're not talking about a street going through, but it is true that we're talking about preserving that. And it feels like a delicate dance to do because we can't say that people's concerns are not valid. They're on to what might happen in the future, but there's so many scenarios that we tried to outline before about what kinds of configurations we might get that I just want to say that again. And I certainly understand the concern of folks who currently live in a dead-end system, like any kind of opening that up does represent a change. And I guess I would just observe that some of the concerns expressed, one could think that every other through street in Milwaukee is a haven for homeless people, is unsafe. They all need, street speed bumps because they all connect to something. And it's true that it would be a change and that the trip configuration would change, and it would certainly provide more access, both for people up to good and people up to no good. But that, in general, that connectivity is something that in general we're striving for. So, Alex, I don't know if you had some things that you wanted to comment on.
I think just a minor one that I don't know if it was maybe unclear in the notes of her actual partition, but we are not requiring any kind of dry well on that existing house. There's almost nothing we can ask for on that house. That's just kind of this sitting there, part of the partition. So it would be the new impervious areas get that treatment.
Right, and I think along those lines that it's fair to understand. I mean, some of what Michelle talked about, making improvements to the driveway, if they're doing a dry well, to maybe share or serve the new lot or combine it somehow. There are costs of development. There are things that you do. It's not, the city is not making the DeRosas develop this property, but if they decide to develop the property, there are some things that they may have to do, including, concluding that they need to improve the driveway for shared access. So that's all I guess I have with this. I don't know if you have other questions for staff.
Was there, I can't recall on the script or not, but if the city attorney wanted to address anything, this would probably be the
We're
time
not
to
quite
do it.
there. I don't think we're quite there.
I don't have that in the script. I have the staff response, and the applicant has a final opportunity for rebuttal. but
Okay, so now is the time when,
No, I think it's top of the next page. I think there's a...
City attorney instructions. Thank you. Any questions for staff?
So, one of the things you mentioned was the developability of the parcel or of the lot, as something that could be, taken away by an exaction or a dedication or whatever. And so, like you take a piece of land in the middle and you take away the ability to put it, to develop it for its intended use. Does the fact that taking this reduce their minimum density from 3 to 2 mean anything in that calculation?
Well, no, I don't think so, because that, for one, that's the minimum density figure, and I think that even with the right-of-way dedication, there's still enough square footage on the property to allow for up to 3 units to be constructed.
Okay, so we're not capping them below what they were allowed to do before.
Right,
Okay.
and the dedication, dropping the minimum number to 2 frees the applicant up to make the lots more equal in size, rather than having to have one that's almost twice the size of the other.
Okay, so I guess that was the wrong question. Is the maximum density reduced by the exaction? And
No, I
if the
don't
answer
believe it is.
No, then that, okay. Thank you.
I might want to add something in response to your question earlier to the person who owns the property behind.
Mr. Fasold.
I did a quick measurement calculation, very, very rough, and I would say it's about 700 feet further to go.
700 feet
Yeah.
further? Not
Yeah.
1,700?
Right.
Okay.
I was going basically to the door of Safeway, the front door.
Interesting. Okay. Well, then I'm
Okay.
curious what I measured then.
Okay,
It wasn't close to that.
okay. I could try again, but that was what I.
No, it's fine. It's a lot different than what I saw when I did the measurement on it.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. So the applicant has an opportunity for a rebuttal and any final remarks.
So I haven't done this yet, but I wanted to address some of the concerns that our neighbors have expressed about homelessness and a thoroughfare and all of that. And Specifically, I wanted to address a couple of times the city has said, well, it might not be a road, don't worry, it might just be a bike path or a pedestrian path, because particularly the connectivity goal, as I understand it, is directed at pedestrians and bicycles having more access, which as a cyclist, I think is kind of awesome. I used to commute from Fairview, which is a really long ways away, down the Springwater Trail and then to my office downtown. There is a huge difference between a bike path that goes between close private housing that has fences on either side and a bike path like where the Springwater Trail is open along Johnson Creek, for instance. And what happens in those areas is very, very different, and how safe they are is very, very different. I used to ride, you try to already find somebody to draft off of to go through those areas off between 82nd and Bell, where there's tight corridors that are really dangerous for women, particularly on bikes. So that's real. I mean, that's a concern. And the other point that I've thought about in relationship to this idea is I look at subdivision plats several times a month for my clients, and this connectivity issue is not unique to Milwaukee. I mean, that's every city wants more of it. But what I see typically is those paths for pedestrians and bikes are developed so that like a police car can drive by one end of it, see to the other end, and there's eyes on that, the length of that path. And that's what makes it safe. And as a woman, I'm sure most of the women in here would say, when they go and they see an alleyway or a path like that, that's part of the calculation you make in your head. Are there eyes on that path? And is it safe for me to walk down it? And I would contend that, our property is 232 feet long, and I think it's another 60 feet or so, Brett probably knows exactly, to the end of White Lake Road, or 70 feet. That's too long a path to be safe in an area like that, because the police would not be able to drive by and see down it. The neighbors are likely to build fences. So it's going to be it would be a long kind of sightless corridor. And I would be concerned about that as someone living next to it for safety, not just for me as a property owner, but for possibly me as a user of the path. So that hasn't been talked about very much. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that this disjuncture, again, there's more conversation about this connectivity as being an overall goal, which is lofty and I think valuable. But that connectivity is meant to connect my neighbors behind us to 43rd. Our new lot, however it's configured, that house and those occupants are not going to be 1 foot farther from Safeway if there's not a dedication of that road. They're going to be able to get to Safeway and 43rd, which is the primary corridor that goes anywhere you want to go, by going on a private driveway. I mean, there's no difference in terms of the connectivity to that lot, making it a private driveway instead of a public road or a public thoroughfare of some other kind. And finally, I just wanted to point out some of the difficulties that we've had with alongside, I don't say with, but alongside the planners, which grows out of, I think, MMC 19.700. And it's this notion that whatever, even if I were adding on just more than 200 feet to my house, this partition, which again is not a conditional use, it triggers that entire chapter of public improvements. And so I think there's a built-in problematic requirement for the planners to apply that code to minimal developments like ours, and it endemically creates possible rough proportionality and nexus issues. And when you have a goal like this where you're trying to create a benefit for property that's not mine, by taking property that is, you have a problem, I think. That's just a basic suspect thing to do. You're not actually addressing the impact of connectivity that my development creates. And that lack of connection, either qualitatively, which is the Nolan test, or quantitatively, which is the Dolan test, puts the planners and people like myself in a really rough spot. So I guess my final ask would be just to look at that section. My experience is that most land use codes are sort of tiered. So like if you want to do a zoning change, I mean, that's like fair game. And the courts have held that it is. I mean, in this line of takings, constitutional takings, when you go to a subdivision, you have to bring roads in to get to new lots. They have no access, generally speaking, to public roads. For the most part, that's what a subdivision does. You have to build new roads. This isn't one of those. We have a road, we have frontage, and those alternative configurations create frontage on 43rd Avenue. So my point is that the code itself creates this tension between the impact that a minimal development, or if you read it, just adding on, like we have to tear down our garage if we were, for this partition, if we were just to build a new garage and put a new room on our house, 19,700 would come into play. And the planners would be in a position of having to make this calculation of rough proportionality, which is codified, and they should be making a nexus calculation too, which is not codified, in my opinion, to keep the city out of trouble and not to impose on property owners unduly. But thank you for your time and your consideration of this. And again, I want to thank the city planners and even the attorney, who I know wants to say something, for all their work.
Quick question.
We have a final question.
Can we ask her a
It's not
question?
in the script, but I don't have a problem with it.
So one of the configurations that was discussed was the flag lot with the duplex.
Yeah.
Was that something that you were amenable to?
Yes, yeah. But the conversation with the planners went something like this. You know, the flagpole kind of creates more non-conforming access ways onto 43rd. So that's a bad thing. That only brings us further out of conformity, whereas our driveway now, as I understand it, because it's going onto a collector road, is already a non-conforming access way. So the thought there was to allow for an easement down the driveway, nonetheless, to the flag portion of the flagpole, to leave the trees and the grapes and the orchard and the gazebo in the flagpole, and to use the driveway as an easement area.
As an access to a duplex?
Exactly. Or, well, I mean, we don't have to build the duplex right now, but we'd probably be happy to do that. I would prefer to, detached homes for a lot of reasons, but yes, we would certainly consider that. And just towards the minimum and maximum density that you were asking about, they kind of pan out the same with this property just because of the math. So if you apply the square footage, we barely, with the dedication, we barely come under the 21, I think we're at 21,000 and a few feet or something, to allow for the R7, 7,000 square foot per home. Without it, we're still kind of at that maximum number. I think we get to like 3.8 homes, which is not a home. So
Right. It can be rounded, though.
right. So it's there's very little space between minimum and maximum just on the configuration and the size of that lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with the final applicant rebuttal, we're going to close the public hearing in the record. And the city, just to confirm, the city attorney's instructions will come after the public record has been closed. Okay, so I don't have the hearing on Appeal AP 2019-001, the public testimony portion of the hearing continuation is closed. Now we have an opportunity for the city attorney to provide any instructions or directions to the commission.
I just wanted to say a few brief words before you embark on what I'm sure will be some robust deliberations. But before I do that, I wanted to thank staff and also thank the applicant and everybody else who came to testify. One of the underlying lessons possibly is that code's not perfect. It doesn't account or address every situation that we have. And we, while the applicant points out, and I think staff did as well, each piece of property is unique and you have to take a fresh look at it in the surrounding areas and figure out how it fits. And I think there's been a significant effort. I know my predecessors were involved in a significant amount of it. And I just wanted to take some time and remind the commission of what their duty is today, and that's to assess the information that you've heard from both the applicant and staff and others who testified and render a decision. But the critical point that you're deciding today is whether or not the findings offered by staff adequately support the proposed dedication. We've heard a lot of legal discussions and case law and standards and scrutinies and things like that. And those are things that lawyers decide. And if this case gets to the right forum and the right time, lawyers will decide those things or help instruct or inform the decision around that. You're not responsible for determining here today whether it's unconstitutional or constitutional. That's not your job. You're not lawyers. You're the Planning Commission. And as staff pointed out, and we've had some meetings with the applicant, in the event that you determine the findings don't adequately support the dedication, we've worked out some alternatives. Many of which, or at least the couple that we talked about, seemed amenable to the applicant. They will involve some further process, which complicates things a little bit, but I think we've kind of figured out a pathway for which those could occur. If you should determine that the findings proposed by staff support the proposed condition, then we go down that route. That's really all I had to say, but I wanted to make sure and articulate that for you so that you understand where your position is today. There you have it.
Thank you. So is the commission ready for discussion? Ready to do it? Anyone want to go first? All right, Commissioner Edge.
Ultimately, we are here to answer the question of did staff prepare findings that support the decisions that they made, and the guidance from our attorney was really correct. It's not really our place, I think, to use amateur judgment in making legal determinations or answering legal questions. And so, there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of, interrelated, concerns and issues and everything. And, but when it comes down to it, I feel like with the addition of the analysis of rough proportionality that staff offered in this staff report issued last week, that they have provided data findings that are sufficient to support the original decision. And so there's certainly more conversation that could be had, and I would have more deliberation if the rest of the commission feels differently about this particular question. But I do think that the primary question that we're looking to answer today was whether or not the rough proportionality analysis was roughly proportionate. And so, based on the information that we're looking at right there, I think that question is answered, and that, there's certainly other options there, but what was presented to us is defensible based on the findings that staff has prepared.
Thank you. Commissioner Grau?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Edge just said it much more eloquently than I could have, but I think that was the question. in the last hearing, and just at the very baseline, I think staff did a good job in explaining kind of what we were looking for in the hearing 2 weeks ago, so I would agree.
Commissioner Massey.
Yeah, I guess I still have some reservations, and those reservations are laid out, I think, in the decision-making options that the commission has been presented on page 6 of 6. And so I guess my question is I'd like to further explore the preliminary denial of the appeal and what that entails, because I've read this thing several times and I'm not sure I completely grasp what that means. So I would ask for the staff maybe to enlighten me further.
Go for it.
You want to do it?
I'll take it.
Okay.
You can take that.
Well, so if you're talking about option C,
Yes.
the rationale behind that option has a couple factors. One, the appeal is about the original partition.
Right.
And so if you're preliminarily denying the appeal, the rationale here was that what would happen would be the applicant, if the applicant was still amenable and wanted to continue with the partition, would make revisions to the partition. And so that's part of why we'd start with a preliminary denial. Like it's not a final decision, but the idea is if the partition is starting to change from what it was originally configured as, that the appeal at some point would become unnecessary. And as you've heard, most people seem to express an interest in not necessarily stopping the partition, but in not having the right-of-way dedication. So that's part of the component. The idea is you would kind of suspend a decision on the appeal, kind of headed in the direction of denying it, because the direction you'd be pursuing, kind of with the applicant's cooperation, would be a revised partition that assumedly the appellant would not want to appeal because it didn't have that characteristic.
But the revised partition would include variances, so it would be a whole different set of findings.
Yeah, and I understand that once, if we went down this road, there's, going to be some other decisions that have to be, considered and adjudicated at some point. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is is there an elegant solution here, And I'm always looking for an elegant solution, and I think maybe I'm grasping at straws, but paragraph C seems to me to be the only elegant solution possible, and I know that it's not a slam dunk in option C.
Yeah, well, it means that there would be a different application before you.
Right.
In that we would need to press pause on this application to initiate that one.
And building on what Denny said about what would come into the revised application for the partition would be a variance or variances, whether to the requirement for right-of-way dedication for a proposed flag lot, or a variance from the lot width standard for a different configuration. So the applicant would revise their application, they would address the approval criteria and try to make their case for meeting the approval criteria. I guess it would help if that was the direction things were heading, to maybe get some direction from the Planning Commission. I guess staff could then work to write findings, if we're bringing it back to the Planning Commission, so that you would be in a position to approve the variances if that's the inclination that you had.
Well, I'm not sure that you could do that exactly. I think it is because until we would have all those arguments laid out, it would be, but hitting pause with the permission of the applicant is clearly something we could do. It extends the clock out, and it allows basically a revised application to come forward.
Well, it obviously requires the applicant to be amenable to another path. But, I guess I'm trying to figure out, how amenable the applicant is to pursuing, that other avenue, knowing that, that
I think we
there are
heard,
other variances that would have to be.
Yeah. I think we heard that the applicant was amenable to that.
Are we able to go down path C if we can't find an error? Can we just choose to go down that route because we have an amenable applicant and they're sympathetic to the testimony we've
Now,
heard?
that's a good question. I think ultimately, when do we deny the variance? The denial of the variance, yeah, I think you can, because you're basically hitting pause
It would be more
on
like,
this application, and another application is coming forward.
so option C is a lot like just another continuation where some things would happen offline.
It's sort of like the applicant's withdrawing the current application.
Right.
So we wouldn't actually be denying anything.
Well,
Right.
in
The
the
appeal.
end,
We would be
in the end, you have
continuing to
to
give them a
deny
chance
the
to
appeal.
You have to
deny.
deny the appeal.
Okay, okay.
And then you're acting on a revised application.
But if we deny the appeal, that doesn't automatically make the application move forward.
Well, it's a preliminary denial.
Well, that's why
it's a-
it needs to be paired with the other applications.
Right, because part of what we were trying to do in working with the applicant was that, option B is kind of just the end of the partition as proposed. If you approve the appeal, deny the partition, it's done, and she wouldn't have the opportunity to bring it forward again under the same partition application fee anyway. So she could certainly come back and submit a new partition with a new partition fee and in addition to the fees of the variance. So option C was us trying to work to at least minimize a little bit the impact of having to essentially start over.
When I said further processing, wasn't I clear?
Good questions,
We
Commissioner
debated
Massey.
this back and forth in trying to create that section of the code, the alternatives for you. It's like, well, wait a minute, when you have to deny the appeal in order to consider this other alternative at some point, because the code says that the final decision on the partition is the appeal. So basically, in there, it gives the applicant a chance to withdraw the current application, which takes all of this kind of off the table and replace it with a different scenario that includes the variance. And I think you can get there if you then approve the variance. You might not get a recommendation for approval from staff on it, but there is discretion involved in those variance decisions.
And I guess to add to that, I would say if it would seem unfair to the applicant if you had enough deliberation or enough of a sense, at least among those of you who are here tonight constituting the quorum, if you felt, even if this comes back with a variance, I don't see a way that I would approve it, then you're kind of setting the applicant up in a way for spending additional money and taking additional time and process and returning, even though you're not necessarily required to guarantee an outcome right now. But I guess if you straw polled and found that all four of you or three of four of you were not necessarily inclined to approve the variances, then it would, if I was the applicant, I guess I would think, well, do I want to go? I'm willing, but do I really want to do this if I don't think? Of course, we don't have a full body tonight either, so there are a few people missing.
Just one other thing. I'm not a fan of dragging things out for long periods of time or imposing, additional effort and time and expense and that kind of thing. But my sense is that that this is our only avenue to possibly come up with a solution that's acceptable to many.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. This is a real conundrum, and I just keep coming back to the applicant. You're too good at making the case for the action you're not asking us to approve. And so I really appreciated the notion that the burden of proof has been shifted from the applicant to the government when they're looking at the dedication of right-of-way. I'm really taking that to heart. I think this type of analysis is what we need to see up front for future right-of-way dedications, and getting quantitative, laying out the alternatives that were considered. This is the way that this process needs to go, and I wish we would have had this in front of us up front, and so I hope staff can take notes and just recognize what that means to have the burden of proof in this case being shifted. I am a little bit concerned that some of the calculations we saw maybe it could have been laid out more clearly, or maybe it was an error in my understanding. Maybe I just don't understand, but it did seem like the calculation 1, 2, and 3 were not really mutually exclusive, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or just presented in a way that I couldn't understand it. If I were to find an error, it would just be in how those calculations were not presented as mutually exclusive in a way that we could really see what options were considered. But in the end, I do think this passes for me the proportionality test, just because the applicant talked about the evil that is being remedied. And the evil here is that you have a big property with no access to it, and there has to be access either through a right-of-way or through an easement or through some creative solution and a variance that we might approve. From where we sit, the applicant came to us and asked us to approve this. This is the option that was chosen. The applicant was not forced to come here. The applicant could have chosen, and it's a constrained site because of how deep it is and what the variances are, but the applicant could have come here and went through the type 3 approval up front and asked us to make our decisions. And I don't know what we would have chosen, because we would have heard a different set of testimony. Maybe the different folks would have been here to testify. The staff would have come up with a different set of findings, but that's not the route the applicant chose to go through. The applicant capitulated and asked us to go through a type 2 process. So I guess I am inclined to say I don't find an error, and I'm torn, but I'm inclined to deny the appeal and let this move forward. Unless we really wanted to be creative and just open this up and do the straw poll around, are we likely to approve a flag lot consideration with an exemption? I guess after hearing the testimony I've heard, I don't know.
It's still an uncertainty.
It's an uncertainty on whether we would approve the type 3 variance that would come out
whichever type 3 variance option was chosen. They are all uncertainties.
I don't know enough to lean one way or another on that, other than there's some very sympathetic testimony that we've heard.
There are a lot of issues to consider with this, and certainly, were we to go past the first question of is rough proportionality actually roughly proportionate? If we go past that question and into the other policy weeds, there's a robust discussion to be had there. But ultimately, we're a review body following the code, and the code is what we have the day the applicant submits their application. That's what we're working from. And the code, is pretty clear. And it's, the decision needs to be supported by findings of fact. Staff produced those findings. We had a question about whether or not there was an error in any of those findings, and we are not seeing an error. And so it seems pretty dry to me at that point. That first question gets answered, and that's kind of that's where we are. That's our role, I think, in this decision process.
So it would be kind of, we could issue this kind of courtesy preliminary denial if we wanted to give the applicant the opportunity to gamble with us approving a variance, essentially.
I think that's the route that I would take.
I don't know that, just straight up denying. I don't know if we should take a recess and find out if the applicant wants to roll the dice with us and if we should grant that courtesy, or if we should just move forward with the denial. We'd heard some willingness to reconfigure, but we just don't know what the outcome would be for the commission to approve that.
I am hesitant to imply any guarantees.
There are no
We're
guarantees.
not,
yeah.
we're not, I don't, yeah, we're not.
And
Would be
I'm
inappropriate,
hesitant to, I mean, I'm not, that's my, it's absolutely uncertain. We just don't know until we have, the new evidence in front of us.
We would be having a different conversation, and you would be advocating about the value of connectivity and walking to Safeway, and it would be the question in front of us, right? Would be.
I mean, that's entirely possible, that's where that would go, yes.
I'm just looking at option C as providing an opportunity. We don't get to do that very often.
A preliminary denial leaves the door open. I like the way you phrased that. I guess if after this, the applicant and staff would go back and talk about what options are and ways, what the findings might look like, and this would then come back to us with another set of public hearings. And I think staff and the applicant have both laid this out as a direction that folks are open to.
Do we think it would be valuable to have a 5-minute recess for staff to confer with the applicant about these options?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
That never
Then
hurts.
5-minute recess. Okay, we're back from recess.
Okay, well, we had a,
You could just point them to my email, basically, it's not
Oh.
different than that.
okay, we had a chance to discuss the status with the applicant, and what we have essentially agreed to is a concept of extending the hearing out 120 days, and we need to find a date certain to extend it to, with the understanding that we we may initiate a hearing prior to that, but we would renotice everybody. So we would do an entire renotice, and that there will be an application, sort of a revised application for the partition, and a variance that accompanies that. So again, I think it's a preliminary denial with the hearing extended out about 120 days. Somebody needs to find the date certain for that. I can do it if you don't want to, but
You want one of us to do it?
yeah, I think these guys are working on it now. So if that makes sense, so basically what they would do is come back with a brand-new application and a variance that you would then hold a hearing on. And at that time, you would finalize the denial. I mean, one other thing we talked about, and we could talk about this further with the neighbors and the appellant, is it may make sense for them to actually withdraw the appeal at that time. We'll work that out. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but where it makes a difference is what findings we need to make. So if we withdraw the appeal, we don't have to make the findings about the error and everything. We don't have to find an error. But we don't want to just withdraw the appeal without having the substitute minor partition in place, ready to go. So lots of moving parts. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Does that feel right to?
And there is an exhibit in your packet that from Michelle to Brett, I think, that basically outlines what it was that one of the options there. It's a similar option. It's
Attachment 1.
attachment 1.
Could you just clarify whether it's a brand-new application or one that's a modification that comes under the same application fee?
Oh, part of the reason we're doing all of this is to keep the minor partition application alive, so that it's not like a denial of the minor partition and then they would need to resubmit for new minor partition. So we're keeping that alive and allowing it to be revised. They will need to submit an application and the fee for a variance. Okay.
Given that this is really at the applicant's request, I think that it's completely appropriate to support that, extend the clock, and let them continue working on the application. So I mean, do we want one other comment, or are we ready for a motion?
I think we're waiting for the date certain from
Okay.
Brett to read into the.
If I use this device correctly, I think July 10th is 120 days from today, that's a Wednesday. The the first Planning Commission hearing in July would be July 9th, so the day before that. So I think if you maybe set it to July 9th, that's just about 120 days out. It's 119 days out, I think.
With the understanding that we may come earlier than that with notice.
Does that sound right?
So I could entertain a motion on that.
How are we structuring that motion?
Preliminary denial.
Preliminary denial and extend or come back for a hearing on July 9th. Okay, so I move that we go with option C, preliminarily deny the appeal. The applicant is intended to waive the 120-day clock, and so we will extend to July 9th.
Date certain.
Date certain.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
What do I do now?
Okay. So for the audience, that's basically moving towards no road through that site. But you will all get a notice. We will renotice either way, so you'll get another notice about this.
Thanks, guys.
Another recess?
No.
I should have used the recess to get my paperwork. in order
Hopefully
for
this
the
one will
next
be
hearing.
easier. Hopefully.
No promises.
No,
I feel like every time we say that,
I know.
I mean, maybe we don't say that.
I'll bring it back. Yeah.
Yeah, Alex, I think you have the right idea.
Now that you're warmed up.
I'm just gonna.
Oh, do you need the
I
agenda?
lost the. I lost some of the stack is the next hearing.
Oh, here.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, I printed it out so you can have that.
Okay, so on to the next hearing of the evening, which is a Type 3 variance request. The public hearing on VR 2019-002 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application VR 201-002. The purpose of the application is to request a variance on a property located at 5485 Southeast Harlene Street. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning or subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provisions. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
The applicable criteria are Chapter 12.16, Access Management, Section 19.301, Low-Density Residential Zones, Section 19.607, Off-Street Parking Standards for Residential Areas, Section 19.911 for variances, and Section 19.1006 for Type 3 review.
All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuances or extensions shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuation or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. So, conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
No. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? And does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? So let's proceed to the staff report.
Okay, Commissioners, it's still Brett. And we'll see what we can do with this variance request. I think it is a little bit less complicated issue than the one you've just dealt with. So as you noted, this is a request for a variance to have a wider driveway approach than the code allows, and the location is at the end of Harlene Street, which on this map is showing you the general location. This Wood Avenue is to the west, Stanley Avenue on the east, Harlene extends down, and you can see we have just a little bit of right-of-way. Here we actually have a connection all the way to Wood, and you can see here all four of these parcels, even though they all have some development, they're all potential candidates in the future for redevelopment. They could all split at least to create one additional lot each, and depending on depending on the right-of-way, final right-of-way configuration, and maybe a potential variance or two for just going a little bit under the R7, a minimum of 7,000 square feet might be, a couple of them might be able to split into 3 lots. So a little different case here, although some similarities where we have you can see the potential street connection here. And in part, that tension between the potential and the reality is what gets us to this request, because what happens is it's not a through street right now. It is effectively a dead end, but you can see it's clearly not designed to be a permanent dead end. This isn't kind of our standard cul-de-sac bulb. There's no real formal turnaround in the public right-of-way. And so what has happened on this property, and what's gotten us here, is the applicant has, through his experience, decided to improve his existing driveway, kind of formally widening it. And because this is the street configuration here is kind of a little bit dated, but Google Street View of it, it's not an area where we have curbs and sidewalks. So these are just asphalt approaches going directly from the street surface onto people's properties. He's borne the brunt of a lot of turnaround movements at his property, and not quite the same turnaround movement, but a similar situation, just catty corner to the southwest. This property also, to create more parking opportunities for themselves, they also widened their driveway. Both of these properties were the subjects of some code compliance. There was an awareness that this widening had happened outside of the code allowance. The property to the southwest decided that they would remove some of their asphalt and kind of meet the standard, and the applicant decided he would pursue the variance application and has made a case for some of the exceptional aspects of the site here. So here's a view looking west towards the dead end of the street, and then flipping around and looking kind of back east. You can see some of the features of the street here, including some storm drainage. So here's a before and after, kind of showing the improvement, focusing on the driveway. I noticed that the house is also a little different color, so there have been quite a few improvements, but we're focusing on the driveway one here. And you can see, and the applicant, if you're interested, could explain maybe more about, kind of the actual physical construction. My understanding is that the driveway, at least in part, has been reinforced a little bit, at least at the end closest to the street, to kind of accommodate some of the additional traffic. So, again, because there were a couple things going on here, but because the normal requirement or limitation for access ways or the driveway from the public right-of-way onto a property, they have to be at least 9 feet wide, and they're limited for residential properties to 20 feet wide. And the applicant has made a 32-foot wide driveway approach. And so the variance that's requested is actually from that Chapter 12.16. And it relates to, we also have a requirement in our residential parking standards that say your driveway on site can't be wider than the driveway approach. until you either go a certain distance and start widening up. And part of the idea with that requirement is that, especially where we have pedestrian facilities, the idea is to try to limit the area of exposure that a pedestrian might have from where a vehicle coming in or out of the property might be. In this case, if the variance is approved, the driveway on site is as wide as the driveway approach, and so it would meet, with a variance, it would meet the standard in 19.607. It says, don't make your driveway on site wider than the driveway approach. So just, I don't know if I confuse things, but the variance is about the driveway approach. And if it's approved, then the site complies with the width on site. This is a shot of the applicant's site plan, just kind of showing a little bit kind of the overall site, and you can see the kind of the other structures and paving on the site. The blue area here is his indication of if he did return, if he wasn't granted the variance and had to return the driveway approach to he's got 21 on here, but I think if we went to 20 feet, he would have to cut out at least a section on his driveway to meet that 19.607 standard. So he wouldn't be allowed, without the variance, he wouldn't be allowed to keep this portion of the driveway. It would violate that other standard of the code. So here he's just demonstrated the relatively small area of the drive that would be an issue if the variance weren't approved. And then here's just another shot of kind of straight on looking at the house and the driveway improvement. So the key issue that we identified for this is if the Planning Commission, if the city approves a variance to allow a 32-foot wide driveway approach, does this create any issues in the future if Harlene Street is extended all the way through to Wood, and if we got improvements, if we start to get formal curbs and sidewalks, would we want to allow this 32-foot wide driveway to be there? Now we start to actually have a possible real conflict with the spirit of the code there, which is saying, let's try to limit the amount of exposure for pedestrians. And so our discussion of that in the staff report kind of arrived at the proposed condition that was the one that we included in the recommendations, which was to basically require an agreement from the applicant not to oppose or object to, maybe the most likely scenario would be the city at some point coming through and with money, whether it's a SAFE program or something else, and constructing curbs and or sidewalks. At that point, rather than committing to keeping the 32-foot wide driveway, that the agreement that we're proposing as a condition would be the applicant wouldn't object to the city returning it to a 20-foot wide approach at that time when we get those improvements, and then kind of making their driveway meet whatever code standards are in place at the time for driveway width. They are what they are right now, but they may change by what time we ever get those improvements in there. So that was our proposed remedy, I guess, to address that potential future issue. And I guess as we presented in the findings, we felt that it was a reasonable and appropriate request. It is kind of responding to the particular conditions that this currently dead-end street and lack of an actual turnaround represents, and we didn't identify any significant impacts from allowing the variance. So with that one proposal of the condition requiring an agreement not to oppose a narrowing of the driveway, that we felt that would be adequate mitigation. So with that in mind, our recommendation as staff was to approve the variance with that condition that's recommended, and to allow the driveway to remain in place. So with that in mind, I don't know if you have any questions about this. Again, I kind of have the standard options for you here about approving, making some adjustments that will get into the record, deciding that you need more time, and continuing the hearing. We do have plenty of time left on the land use clock for this one. It's sometime in May that the 120-day clock expires. So if you feel like you need more time for this, we can do that. Or if you feel for some reason that it's more appropriate to deny the application, we would take that into consideration and make some adjusted findings.
Any questions for staff?
So the problem that's being solved is the turnaround problem?
Well, the problem that's being solved by the applicant's driveway creation, is that what you're asking? It's As presented in the applicant's materials, there are two issues. The primary one is, and you saw if you looked at the materials, all the different shots of all different kinds of vehicles that are using the driveway to turn around, and the applicant could speak a little bit more to his experience from there on the site in terms of what kinds of damage have happened to the property as he tried to work a little bit with the more restricted driveway width. So to some degree, this is an acknowledgement that this is just kind of what happens at this end of the street. And because of some of the stormwater issues that had happened down there, he felt that this would be a solution that would both prevent or limit future property damage and provide essentially kind of a more workable turnaround there.
Okay. Thank you.
Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items that are included in the meeting packet?
We have not.
Then I think we'll hear from the applicant if he wishes to testify. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Steve Vukovic, and I live at 5485 Southeast Harlene Street. I really don't, I think Brett presented, maybe Brett, can you go to the before and after? And maybe I can just give a little bit of history. So,
You have to stay here and so the mics will pick you up.
Stay close to a mic.
can I do this, Chair?
Yeah, and you can even use the cursor to point if you need to.
So what's happened over the years is this area here.
Sorry, you have to just slide it. It shows up on here, but you have to kind of slide it out enough to make it.
Oh, get it
there
recognized?
Yeah, get it onto this. Sorry, just keep. There you go.
Oh, so look here, don't look here. Got it. This area here was yard, well, all down here, it's just a tough spot for people to turn around. You'll see now that this split rail fence is gone. It got hit twice just from vehicles backing up and turning around. So I planted these bushes in front of them and they still got hit. So they've just been pulled out. And I've tried to pull the property line back a little bit to make more room, but a lot of the turning around gets done down here. And this was just a mud hole. This was my yard and grass, and it just turned muddy. And every year I'd go get a couple yards of gravel down at Clackamas Landscape, and I'd fill it in here, and I'd fill it in all up along the front of my property here. And like Brett mentioned, there is some water, some standing water or rainwater that would sit here too. So it just was a muddy mess. And the driveway is shot. The driveway's not all shot because of car traffic turning around. It was just a 55-year-old, 60-year-old driveway. So I replaced the driveway. I graded it a little bit differently so the street runoff wouldn't actually go up onto my driveway, because it was sitting up on my driveway. And when I did that, I expanded the driveway over so people who were turning around weren't going into the mud mess. I wouldn't have to keep putting the gravel there. And the last thing I wanted was people driving off the edge of my driveway into that, because it would just start breaking my driveway. And like Brett said, the first section here of the driveway, I had higher PSI with the little fiberglass flakes to help with the heavy traffic. So that's what I did. So I don't know if there's any questions or.
So the condition that's recommended by staff is that were the front road frontage to be improved, that you would not object to the narrowing of your driveway along with the improvements.
Right.
Is that something that you're okay with? Because it seems like the problem you're trying to solve is people turning around, and so if the road gets improved and extended, then theoretically they're not turning around there
Right.
anymore,
I think if the road got extended to where this issue went away, now, I don't know if they could put curbs and sidewalks in and not extend the road and not widen the turnaround, then I suppose I would, if I'm not in this position,
right,
then I
So the problem you're seeking to solve is people turning around and having that big mud pit and people getting stuck and knocking your fence over and they back around.
Right.
And, yeah.
So if that goes away, so I don't know, technically, I suppose that doesn't necessarily go away just to put an approach or curbs in front of my property. Realistically, I don't know that that would happen without the road going through.
Right, I mean, I think we'd be looking at, once the road goes through and other street improvements occur, it's likely we might, install a curb along a portion of your driveway there. And it would all depend on what the design is and when that all happens and when a sidewalk might go in.
Yeah,
It's a ways out and there are no plans to do it.
Yeah, I don't know that it would ever happen, and if it resolves this problem, I'm amicable to whatever.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So, if in fact that was the case, I'm trying to get a sense of, where the 12-foot, is. And so looking at the after picture, would that roughly be, the 20 feet, would that roughly be like from the edge of the house or those shrubs perpendicular to the street?
You're asking where the 20 feet would go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see this.
That seam?
Dividing, that seam.
Okay.
That's basically 20, I don't know if I could go back to, will it go to this picture?
Or you can just, you can use the cursor to, that's the next one.
Okay. So the 20 feet is basically in line with the house, which is this seam right here. So this is, even though this almost, with the view of this picture, with I'm sure the lens that was used, from here to here is the 12 feet, and from there to there is the 20 feet.
So do you currently have a need to get vehicles, in the back of your property?
We have an RV that we have parked back there.
Okay.
You can sort of see the cover of it here.
So even if that 12 feet was curbed, you could still get in and out of there?
Well, if I couldn't, I wouldn't be parking an RV. I don't know.
Okay. I can't solve all the problems in the future here. I'm just trying to figure out
I'll have to
all the
cross.
ramifications. Yeah.
I'll have to cross that bridge when I get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions for the applicant beyond that?
No, good, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So no testimony from anyone else in our audience today. I think everyone got burned out by the first hearing. No rebuttal. I think we can just go straight to the closure of the hearing. Okay, so the public testimony portion of this hearing on VR-2019-002 is now closed. Ready for discussion? You want to go first, Commissioner Massey?
I have nothing else to say.
You thinking that you could approve this?
Yeah.
Commissioner Graham?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's actually really nice that you improved your driveway so that other people could turn around. I don't think I've ever heard anything so nice in any of these planning commissions ever. So, well done.
Commissioner Edge?
Yeah, I think, no, I'm good with it. I'm good with the condition. The findings are accurate.
Thank you for participating in this process. Should we vote?
Yeah.
Take a motion.
You want to do it this time?
Your last chance.
So, yeah.
Send us out.
I move to approve file VR-2019-002 with the recommended findings and conditions in attachment 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Approved. So, if anyone wishes to appeal this decision to the City Council, you must make the application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. So, that's that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
So next on the agenda is just any work session items
Don't have anything.
and any other business or updates.
The Comprehensive Plan Committee meets next Monday to discuss housing again. David was working furiously today to get a packet out by tomorrow, I think. So we're moving forward there. And then in the beginning of the month, we will again be dealing with we're meeting twice a month right now, and the beginning of the month we'll be dealing with the other Block 3 topic areas, which are natural resources, public facilities, and something else.
Do you have, were you in attendance at the first Block 3 meeting?
I was.
Do you have anything, anything to share about how that meeting went?
Some of the interesting discussion focused on public facilities and its relationship to growth. And one of the things that we are talking about is the notion that our growth forecasts have been questioned as being low, the metro forecast for the 20-year forecast. And so what we're looking at are what are our facility limitations, and the sewage treatment plant does present some limitation. In very rough numbers, we have capacity for about 3,900 new dwelling units through the treatment plant. And I think this is right. I want to just put all of this with an asterisk because I don't know that I have the numbers right, but let's say 3,900 new units, and we have capacity in the city inside our in the community today, and for roughly 2,000. Is that, maybe I'm talking population, not dwelling units. But anyway, it gives us some capacity for growth above and beyond what we currently have planned. So the way we're sort of framing the discussion is that we have, 1,500 units or so we can play with. We can say, we can bump up densities throughout the community by 1,500 and still meet that capacity. We could focus that 1,500 in the downtown. We could focus that 1,500 towards our nodes or along corridors. And that's sort of the framework we're bringing forward. That's different than the notion of trying to address housing equity by opening up housing opportunities throughout the community, sort of missing middle housing throughout the community. This is saying that opportunity ought to be focused somewhere, or ought to at least respond to the capacity in the treatment plant. If we want to go beyond that capacity and open up housing opportunities more broadly, we have to do so with awareness that we potentially are creating a future capacity problem at the treatment plant. So that's kind of where we're going with the discussion. And I'm not sure where we'll end up.
So I thought I read, and I guess I don't have it right here, as you would figure, not seeing it conveniently, but I thought it said that we had capacity for double the population at the water treatment facility.
Water treatment, double.
Oh.
Did I misstate where it was? But it's the wastewater treatment facility.
That's more constrained.
Is where the constraint is.
Okay.
So I may have misspoken, and I didn't mean to. But it's the sewage treatment plant is where the.
So drinking water supply, we can
Drinking
do
water,
double.
You're
but-
right, we have
okay.
about double.
Okay.
Yep. So that's the framework we're working on, and so the choices back. So that was the discussion, that was partly the discussion that we introduced 2 weeks ago at the top, at the Block 3 discussion, but it's basically going to drive the housing discussion. The other topics, we talked some about natural resources, and again, there is concern about natural resources and potentially about natural resource conflicts with solar access, interaction with the climate action plan and how those things work together. Anyway, we still have a lot of work to do and taking it to the next step for discussion. I think at our next meeting, I think David's going to come to the commission and talk about the comp plan.
I saw that.
Yeah. A few of us had an interesting field trip the other day. Robert, you want to?
Well, sure. We looked at four cottage clusters.
Yeah.
I think that my takeaway is certainly two of them met what I kind of thought were a cottage cluster. I think one of them was kind of a hybrid, and one wasn't even close to being a cottage cluster.
Right. One was an apartment building with a really cool courtyard.
And I know everyone can't get off, for these kind of things, but I thought it was very instructive to go and see them and walk in them. And it was kind of interesting. We had a resident come out and say, "Are you guys here for an architecture tour?" We says, "No, we're members of the planning department and planning commission," and she invited us into her place and talked all about it. So, that was kind of a real sort of benefit, to be able to do those kinds of things. I thought that, from my perspective, the first unit, was it Curry?
Yeah.
Cully?
No.
Cully.
The Cully one, that was the second one we went to.
Cully to me was, it didn't have the wow factor that maybe some of the other places did.
Cully was the second one.
Oh, I'm sorry. The first one, that was the nearest one, and the name escapes me. Didn't
Cooper,
have,
I think.
Yeah, it didn't have the wow factor maybe of some of the others and that kind of thing. But my reaction was it didn't have the wow factor, but it just kind of worked. There were things that we didn't like about all of them and that kind of thing, but it looked like a reasonable approach to a cottage cluster. I guess what I was thinking.
I think it was 16 units somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was
12. And it was about
6 and 6. Yeah.
Maybe it was about 19 units per acre. I think. Yeah. And it had two buildings out on the street, facing the street, and everything else tucked behind with sort of a common green in the middle.
Yeah.
And but it's had really shallow setbacks to the adjoining properties. That was kind of my only thing that I thought was maybe an issue. But it did seem to work. Yeah. Second one was Cully Grove up in the northeast.
Which was a very impressive place, but it was very expensive. And, my reaction was, man, that was a place that required a lot of commitment going in to this kind of place, because there was a lot of shared, not just facilities, but sort of shared outlook, I guess I would call it, and that kind of thing. But it was intriguing. But man,
It had a common building and gardens and playground equipment, and I mean, obviously it was a lifestyle choice to live there.
Right.
And the one unit that was for sale was almost $800,000.
$780,000.
It was a standalone unit. And there were only a couple standalone units, and then there were duplexes and triplexes and a couple tiny little almost ADU-like structures in the parking lot. So it had a wide variety of housing types.
This one that was for sale was obviously the largest unit. It was 2,800 square feet.
Yeah.
So Cottage? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was right up on the street. Everything else was in the back.
I was wondering, I was going to ask what made it expensive, but I guess it's that it's a 2,800 square foot house.
Yeah. So we don't know what the other one sold for, but I know the little ADUs would be a lot less. It was really interesting. And then I think there was one in Northeast that was 4 units basically on about a 7,500 square foot lot. I think that was about right. And I think it was a condoized lot where I think the 4 were on one, and there was a big dog in the back, so we couldn't go back and look at the units in the back. And then we looked at this apartment building that had a beautiful courtyard.
Yeah, it would have been built in 1927.
Yeah, and refurbished.
You had to go up from street level into this courtyard, and you would have sworn you were like in the Netherlands or somewhere.
Yeah.
It was just really,
Or
really, it was striking.
or Hollywood. I kept looking for the starlet coming out of the
Right.
one of the units. But,
Anyone else from the commission attend, or were you our rep?
Adam went, and Kim made most of it. She was, had some other things going on, so she was kind of in and out, I guess. She made most of it, I guess.
I think she saw everything.
Saw all? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And it was good. We can get you guys the listing and kind of what we went to see. Some of us took some pictures. I suppose we could get those together too and send those around. But it was interesting. It wasn't guided. It was just, we were just going and looking. Yep.
I was thinking about doing the self-guided tour because I did get the itinerary for it, but I wasn't able to attend during the workday.
Well, the one in Southeast that we all looked at is pretty close. It would be really easy to go hit that one. But the others were Northeast, and definitely interesting.
Any other discussion items? Guess I could entertain a motion. The forecast for future meetings, sorry, thank you.
The only thing I was going to say on, discussion items, I guess. In Clackamas County, the county's running a process, Metro-funded grant, or Metro grant funded for what they're calling the Oak Grove Lake Oswego Bike Pedestrian Bridge. It's a feasibility study, and they are putting together a citizens advisory or community advisory committee right now to advise that feasibility study process, and should be going on for about the next 6 or 7 months. And they are looking for a lot of people. They're looking for what I heard was about like a 25, 30 person. 28 person advisory.
We've been asked to appoint 4, or to recommend 4, and the mayor will be our policy advisory committee member. And then there's a CAC of 28 citizens, basically.
See, Denny's on top of it.
I'm on the TAC.
Cool.
So,
great.
and I've been trying to recruit our 4 with some difficulty. But I was looking to the, I don't know if you guys know Matt Manili and Greg Bartz-Bellman. They're both members of Bike Milwaukee. And my first approach to them, and neither one could do it. And they recommended a set of other people, and I've been trying to recruit the other folks. The biggest difficulty is the county had asked for at least one of the members be from an underrepresented group, and I have had a great deal of difficulty with that particular position. Sherry tried to help, but your candidate folks were really not in the geographic boundary that I was hoping for. They probably hit the county's geographic boundary.
Okay.
But
One is in the zip code 97222 and one is in 97267.
Yeah, neither one in
Okay.
the city boundary.
Okay.
And the one in Oak Grove actually would be great if the county would get somebody from there.
Okay.
And the one out east of town was sort of outside of the study area.
Okay.
So
sure.
Yeah, so I backed off.
Yeah,
there.
the one in Oak Grove is mostly a senior property, but I'm not, were you able to get back to those two guys?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I spoke with both of
What's
them.
the time
Okay.
commitment
Yeah.
that a person would the time commitment for a volunteer on that?
It's not a huge time commitment. What the county project manager said was 3 meetings, but I don't believe him. So, I mean, I don't, they've targeted meetings related to some of the work products, but I got to believe there are going to be a couple more meetings in there. So I haven't been, that's what I've told people, at least that I've communicated with. I've got a couple other requests outstanding right now to try to draw some people in, but I'm trying to get appointments or recommended appointments made by the council next Tuesday. So if somebody's out there watching right now and really wants to do this, and it represents an underrepresented group, which we can define in lots of different ways, call me tomorrow. Yeah, call now.
Numbers on the bottom of your screen.
We'll get you a bargain. Yeah, half price.
Not us.
Any other items for discussion?
Yeah, the other announcement I wanted to make is that on Tuesday, April 9th, while we are meeting, there's going to be a public meeting at the Milwaukee Oak Grove Elks Lodge for the Park Avenue Station Area Development and Design Standards Project. We have not... There's been some interest by community members that are on the project management team committee in getting some engagement with Island Station and residents of Island Station who are, really, within the neighborhood, but on the wrong side of, I mean, not the wrong side, but on, the side of the boundary where Clackamas County doesn't have land use authority. And so they're obviously not proposing any changes to the zoning outside of, in the city. But nonetheless, people in that community would benefit or be impacted in some way by changes in the station area of unincorporated Clackamas County. And so we are looking for people from Island Station to, show up and speak about what they want and what they're concerned about. And I know that it's not going to translate into Clackamas County having any land use authority over, what happens to, them, but, certainly their voices should be heard and have been notably absent.
Thanks. Commissioner Edge. Forecast for future meetings?
We've got them.
We've got them.
Yep. There's an appeal, another appeal hearing coming up of another one of our administrative decisions, and I cannot even remember what this is.
The 3 driveways.
It's what?
It's about we can say, right? I mean, it's about the property at the corner of Lake Road and Main Street. I think it was a piano,
right.
was it a piano place or something?
Yeah.
And so a new business is moving into it. And as part of that change in use that was happening, one of our requirements, I'll ask for correction if I'm off, it has 3 driveways, including 2 that are on either side of like the stop area there. And so I think we were requiring
One of them to be closed.
at least one of them to be closed. The applicant has appealed that decision, so.
So
Interesting.
that'll be next time. And then another Riverway Lane Greenway proposal. So this is one of those properties where there's a property in the Greenway and they want to do something to the house, not even in sight of the water, and we have to deal with it because we haven't fixed the Greenway code yet. And then the second hearing on April 9th is going to be a long, involved one. It's a proposed development on the west side of 19th, next to Spring Park. So, 12-lot subdivision.
Was it actual subdivision?
I think so.
Are they dividing, they're dividing properties up there?
And greenway request, floodplain issues. So Vera is a staff person. She met with some folks from the Neighborhood Association today, and they had concerns. There's variances. So it'll be a long one. It's a really, if you're like planning a vacation, that'd be a really good day to plan.
Really sorry to miss that one.
You all notice how I missed Rusk Road proposal last week. And I was sicker than a dog on vacation, so.
Sorry to hear it.
So karma, is that what you're saying?
It was karma. It was. My 94-year-old mother had to take care of me. Sick. Okay.
I'm sure she appreciated the opportunity.
She took care of me.
I bet she did.
She cooked. She took care of me. Yeah. Okay.
I'll entertain a motion.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We can. Yeah.
Maybe I should.